Hi, Dick Rauscher here. Today we're going to be talking about nugget number 256. Big changes are coming. This article was a little bit difficult to write because it's difficult to talk about the subjects without taking on kind of a negative tone. And I really don't feel negative about any of these ideas. In fact, I think they're absolutely necessary for us to move from where we are in the world to a new place. The primary goal in writing this article was to kind of highlight some of the changes that I think are coming in the world. The more we can pay attention to the changes that are coming, the more we can prepare for them, the better prepared we can be when they arrive, okay? And many of these that we're going to be talking about today are already arriving, okay? So let's get started. First big idea in this article is asking a question. Basically, are we paying attention? Are we really looking at what's happening in the world and understanding what it means for us? Because if we don't understand the meaning and we're not prepared, in other words, we're not paying attention, then we're not going to be prepared when they come. So the question is, are we open to change or are we resisting change kind of unconsciously? Now remember, the primitive ego loves to avoid change. Our primitive ego does not like to change status quo. So it's kind of natural, human nature, for us to ignore some of these things that are coming and kind of pretend that they don't matter or that they're not a big deal. One of the things I'm hoping you'll get out of this article is that they really are a pretty big deal and they are coming. Okay, big idea number one, big change coming is going to be in our global economic system. More and more people are writing about this today. This changes everything. For example, Naomi Klein. There's a lot of good books on what we call economy 3.0 or 2.0, depending on how you look at it. But basically what we're saying is that the global economic system as it's currently structured has been great. It's created the modern world, no question about it. The problem is that it's based on greed, and when we lose the negative feedback or the restrictions on greed, then we allow our economic system to begin to run out of control a little bit, and that's kind of what's happening right now. Our system is based on greed, and it's based on the illusion of separateness, which we talk about a lot in the Stony Hill Nuggets. The other basic problem with our economic system, and this is the big one, it's based on exponential growth in a finite world. In other words, when we talk about endless growth or never-ending profits, what we're really talking about is exponential growth. When growth increases long enough, it begins to go to infinity. Well, anything that goes to infinity on a finite world, in other words, all of our resources, population growth, you name it, everything that we're looking at now is exponential, unlimited, okay? And you'll hear this all the time on the television, any news reports, economists are talking about unlimited growth, another 3% this month. Well, you add 3% on top of 3% on top of 2%, and pretty soon you're going straight up. The problem? Our world doesn't have the resources. It's not an infinite supply. In fact, it's a very finite supply. And right now, our economic system is kind of favoring the 1% or even the top 10%. And we'll look at that in a minute as to why that's a real danger in the world. Okay, let's move on. I'll get to that in a second. Next idea, the big change that's coming, is our dependence on carbon-based energy. Now, I don't need to go into this one too much because everybody in the world is talking about the need to keep oil in the ground or carbon in the ground. We're beginning to see the effects of global climate change and climate disruption. And a lot of the deniers that we've been listening to over the last, 5 years or so are pretty much going away. And the reason they're going away is because the evidence and the intensification of storms, droughts, etc., we are beginning to see the effects of global warming that the scientists have been warning us about now for a long time. So the deniers are beginning to disappear. What's that mean? It means that we're beginning to see the end of the age of oil. It is coming. In fact, some people are even predicting that we'll reach peak oil somewhere around 2020. That's only 4 years from now. Now, as we do, and we'll talk about this again in a moment, we're going to be looking at some pretty significant disruptions in the way we do business in the world, and it's going to impact our lives. The third big change that's coming is we have to learn how to live in a right relationship with nature. And nature is extremely clear. All living systems are based on cooperation and interdependence. And that means that every single living system benefits mutually from its participation in the world. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the wealth inequality that we've been looking at, and the fact, for example, that the Western world is consuming most of the resources on the planet at the expense of pretty near 70 to 80% of the rest of the human beings living on the planet, it means that we're going to have to find a way voluntarily to begin to distribute that wealth. We're going to have to find a way to intentionally accept the fact that mutual benefit for all species means that we're going to have to give up some of our resources. Most people immediately say, well, I'm not giving up nothing, okay? The problem is that we're not going to have a choice. And here's why, and this is the big issue, and this is one of the primary points in this article. When we have people who are living in poverty, people who are starving because of droughts, and they're hungry, and their families are hungry, and they have a lack of hope, they don't see a future tomorrow that's any better than today, what's going to happen? We create anger. People who are hopeless become angry. And that's what we're seeing in the world today. We're seeing it every place. People are angry. We've got, we call them terrorists, but they're really only the tip of the spear. What's really driving it is the fact that there is such an inequality in terms of access to the resources of our planet. And we see this in poverty and drought and hunger and the lack of hope. It's creating anger. And anger is the worst possible thing that you can have happen in a human civilization. Our civilization depends on the rule of law. Now, this isn't always a perfect world that we live in, but at least we attempt to live under rules of law. Our economic policies are designed to be somewhat fair, although they're really not, but at least not for the 70 or 80% who are starving to death in the world. But at least we make the attempt at it. And what happens is anger is going to create some fairly serious cracks in civilization. So the bottom line here is that we are going to be seeing these changes coming. And they're coming whether it's just a natural event like nature kicking in and having negative feedback to offset some of the things that we've been doing to increase the temperature of the planet, or whether it's the sustainable deconstruction of our economic system, our dependence on oil, or our relationship with the rest of the world and with nature, and that means mutual benefit, sharing our resources voluntarily, and this has got to come voluntarily, okay? But these changes are coming, and they are going to create more anger. So we are going to see a lot of disruption in our lives in the next decade or two, okay? That brings us back to the first point. If we're paying attention to this stuff, then we can begin to prepare. And there are things we can do. In future nuggets, I'll be talking about some of these things. But there are things we can do to prepare when this disruption begins to really impact our lives, okay? So the important thing is we need to wake up and pay attention to the fact that these changes are coming and that we need to get ready as much as possible. One of the articles that I wrote recently was on maybe we need to do a little more gardening. In other words, we need to have a little bit closer access to fruits and vegetables that come from our backyard, not from the other side of the world. So, at any rate, this article is a pretty heavy article, but I think it's a really important one. It's probably one of the most important ones I've written in quite a while. I hope you get some ideas out of it. I hope it's helpful for you in terms of paying attention and thinking about preparation. If it does that, if the article accomplishes that goal, I'll be real happy. Okay? All right? Have an awakened week. We'll see you down the road.